My name is Captain Elena Reyes. I was 34 years old, standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, when my mother begged me to hide who I had become. She held up a soft lavender dress on a padded hanger, the kind of elegant thing that cost more than a month's rent in my apartment near Fort Liberty. Her voice was gentle, almost pleading, the same tone she used when I was a little girl, and she didn't want me to make a fuss. "Just this once, Mija, please. Don't wear the uniform to your brother's wedding. The military, it makes people uncomfortable. For Miguel and Sofia, just blend in. Be normal for one day." I stood there holding my dress blues in one hand, the dark coat pressed perfectly, medals lined up in their rightful order, the silver star catching the light on my chest, and the lavender dress in the other. Two versions of me, one they could accept, one they had spent 15 years trying to erase. In that quiet hallway, with the scent of my mother's perfume and the distant sound of my father setting the table downstairs, something inside me finally clicked into place. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of being the daughter who was useful but never celebrated. Tired of carrying their shame like it was mine to fix. Welcome to this story. If you've ever been asked to hide the parts of yourself that took the most courage to build, I see you. Stay with me. This isn't just about a wedding. It's about the moment you stop disappearing for people who were supposed to love you exactly as you are. Type "I'm here" in the comments if you've felt this weight before. I promise the ending is worth every hard part. Let me bring you into that moment a little deeper. My mother wasn't cruel. That's what made it so painful. She was scared. She had clawed her way out of a childhood filled with fear and instability after my grandfather came back from Vietnam a broken man. To her, the uniform didn't represent honor or service. It represented everything she had run from: the late nights, the moving boxes, the silence at dinner tables. When I joined the Army at 18, she saw history repeating. Every promotion, every deployment, every medal felt like a step backward into the life she had fought so hard to escape. So she managed me the only way she knew how, with soft requests, careful omissions, and quiet redirection, and for years I let her. I sent money home. I showed up for family events. I smiled when she changed the subject, whenever someone asked what I did for a living. I became the expert at keeping the peace. But standing there 2 days before my brother Miguel's wedding, holding both garments like a scale of who I was supposed to be versus who I actually was, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Not this time. I looked my mother in the eyes and said softly, "I'll think about it, Mom." She smiled, relieved, squeezed my arm, and left the lavender dress draped across my bed like an offering. As soon as her footsteps faded down the stairs, I sat on the edge of the mattress and ran my fingers over the fabric of my dress blues. This uniform had been with me through sandstorms, through nights where fear tasted like metal in my mouth, through goodbyes that still ache when the wind blows a certain way. It wasn't a costume. It was the most honest thing I owned. I reached into the inner pocket and pulled out the only personal item I ever carry with me, a worn challenge coin from Sergeant Marcus Hale. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the familiar edges, and whispered his name like I always do when I need to remember why I keep going. That coin, that uniform, and that decision in my childhood bedroom changed everything about how I showed up to my brother's wedding. What happened next in that grand ballroom still gives me chills when I think about it. If you've ever stood at a crossroads between being who your family wants and who you actually are, this story is for you. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight loudly. It's to simply stop hiding. I took a deep breath, hung the lavender dress in the closet, and made my choice. Not out of revenge, but out of respect for every version of myself I had silenced for too long. And that choice led to a moment where 15 veterans stood up in a room full of 200 guests. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stick with me, the full story is just beginning. My apartment near Fort Liberty is small, quiet, and exactly the way I like it. One duffel bag can hold everything I need for a deployment. My boots sit polished by the door, ready for whatever tomorrow asks. Most nights I'm asleep by 9:30 because the body learns to rest when it can. The soldiers I serve with know the real me, the one who stays steady when everything is falling apart, who remembers every name and every promise, who still writes letters to families when the worst happens. My blood family never really tried to know that version of me. I've always been the oldest daughter, the one who left home at 18 and came back changed. While other girls my age were posting college parties, I was learning how to lead troops, how to read a map under red light, how to carry more than just my own pack. I send money home every month without being asked. I show up for birthdays and funerals. I carry the emotional weight so no one else in the Reyes family has to. That became my role a long time ago. Be useful, stay quiet, don't make it weird. If you've ever been the reliable one in your family, the one everyone leans on but no one truly sees, you understand how heavy that invisible role can get. Drop reliable in the comments if that's been you too. My mother never came to my commissioning ceremony. She had a charity event that couldn't be moved. When I earned my captain bars, she smiled politely and changed the subject to my cousin's new baby. Deployments were mentioned only in passing. Elena's traveling again, as if I was on some extended vacation, instead of leading soldiers in places most people will never understand. And I let it happen, for years. I told myself it was kindness, that my mother had suffered enough in her own childhood, that my father worked hard and deserved peace at home. That Miguel, my little brother, was the bright one, the easy one to be proud of. He went to a good university, got a solid finance job, wore the kind of clothes that made my mother beam with pride. When he got engaged to Sophia Whitmore from one of those old Southern families with deep roots and even deeper expectations, it felt like the final piece of my mother's dream falling into place. "We're finally going to be the kind of family people respect," she told me on the phone, and I noticed how she said, "finally," like the rest of us had been holding her back. I booked my flight anyway. I pressed my uniform out of habit. I told myself this trip would be simple. Show up, smile, support my brother, fly home. I'm very good at planning operations. I'm still learning how to predict my own family. The truth is, I can stand calm in a firefight. I can make decisions with lives on the line. But put my mother in front of me with that disappointed look in her eyes, and something in me still shrinks. That weekend taught me exactly how expensive that old habit had become. My mother wasn't evil. She was protecting the new life she had built brick by careful brick. After watching her own father come home from Vietnam broken, angry, unstable, lost, she decided the uniform represented danger, shame, and instability. Every time I put mine on, she saw her childhood nightmares returning. So she tried to manage me gently, the same way she managed everything else in her carefully constructed world. I understood her fear. Understanding it just never made the loneliness hurt less. There was one thing I carried that reminded me who I really was, even when my own family made me doubt it. A worn challenge coin from Sergeant Marcus Hale. He was 23, quick with a joke, the kind of soldier who would give you his last ration even if he was starving. The night before our convoy was hit, he pressed that coin into my hand and said, "For luck, Captain. You carry it for me." I still carry it every single day, right over my heart. That coin, that uniform, and the quiet decision I made in my childhood bedroom, those were the only things I needed when I finally walked into my brother's wedding reception. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. The real shift started weeks before the wedding, when the invitations went out and the pressure began to build. My mother started sending me carefully worded messages about elegance and the right impression. Miguel asked me casually to keep things low-key. Even my father stayed silent in the background, letting it all happen. I smiled through every text. I said, of course, but inside something was quietly waking up. If you've ever smiled while your family slowly erased the parts of you they didn't want to see, you know how heavy that silence can feel. This story is for every one of us who carried that weight longer than we should have. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to scream or fight. It's to simply stop helping them hide you. And that's exactly what I decided to do. The pain of being erased by your own family doesn't happen in one big dramatic moment. It happens in 1,000 quiet cuts over the years, small enough that you almost convince yourself they don't hurt anymore. When I enlisted at 18, my mother told the neighbors I was taking some time to figure things out. When I graduated from officer candidate school, she didn't attend. She said the timing conflicted with a church fundraiser. When I came home after my first deployment, she hugged me tightly, but never asked a single question about where I had been or what I had seen. She simply said, "I'm glad you're back," and changed the subject to Miguel's latest soccer game. I learned early not to bring my world into theirs. If you've ever dimmed your light so your family could stay comfortable, you know how exhausting that dance becomes. Type dimmed if you've lived this. Over time, I became an expert at reading the room. At family barbecues, when someone would ask what I did, my mother would jump in with a smile. "Elena's in the service. It's a phase. She'll find something more stable soon." I'd stand there in silence, nodding along like a good daughter. The message was always the same. My uniform, my rank, my service. It was embarrassing to them. My father never corrected her. He would just look down at his plate, or refill his drink. Miguel, my little brother, would laugh it off and steer the conversation somewhere safer. No one ever asked what it felt like to lead soldiers, to make life and death decisions, or to carry the weight of those who didn't come home. I stopped explaining. I stopped sharing. I became the daughter who sent money on Mother's Day, called on birthdays, and never talked about her job. It was easier for everyone that way. But the loneliness settled deep. There were nights I'd come home from the field, still smelling of dust and sweat, and sit in my quiet apartment staring at the challenge coin in my hand. Marcus's coin. The one he gave me with that crooked grin the night before everything went wrong. "You carry it for me, Captain," he'd said. "He never made it home. I did." And every time I touched that coin, I remembered the real cost of this uniform. The one my family saw as nothing more than an inconvenience. My mother's fear made sense on paper. Her own father came home from Vietnam changed, angry, distant, struggling. She spent her childhood watching her family fall apart, moving from place to place, always trying to outrun the shame. To her, my choosing this life felt like I was walking straight back into the darkness she had escaped. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect the fragile new world she had built. Still, understanding her pain never stopped mine from aching. I remember one Christmas dinner a few years ago. A relative asked me directly about my last deployment. Before I could answer, my mother laughed lightly and said, "Oh, Elena doesn't like talking about all that. She's home now. That's what matters." The table moved on. I smiled, passed the mashed potatoes, and felt another piece of myself quietly disappear. That night I sat in my old bedroom and held Marcus's coin so tightly the edges pressed into my palm. I whispered to myself, "This is real. This happened. I am real." It became my private ritual, a way to remind myself that my story mattered, even if the people who shared my blood couldn't see it. By the time the wedding invitation arrived, I had perfected the art of being present without being seen. I told myself I was protecting the family peace. But the truth was simpler and sadder. I had accepted my place as the invisible daughter. Until that group chat changed everything. Looking back now, I realize those years of being erased weren't just painful. They were preparing me to finally stop shrinking. Preparing me to walk into that ballroom as Captain Elena Reyes, not as the phase my mother wanted me to be. The pain of being erased taught me something powerful. When your own family refuses to see your light, you have to learn how to honor it yourself. And that's exactly what I started doing in the days leading up to my brother's wedding. The weeks leading up to my brother Miguel's wedding felt like watching a carefully scripted play that everyone except me had rehearsed for months. My mother threw herself into it with a level of energy I hadn't seen in years. This wasn't just a wedding, it was her final masterpiece, the moment the Reyes family would finally step into the world she had dreamed about since she was a little girl escaping her own broken home. Miguel had always been the golden child. Not because he was smarter or kinder, but because he was easier. He followed the path that made sense to her. Good school, stable finance job in the city, charming smile. And now marrying Sophia Whitmore, whose family name carried old Southern money, quiet power, and generations of proper reputation. When Miguel called to share the engagement, my mother cried happy tears for nearly an hour on the phone. I could hear her beaming through the speaker. "We're finally arriving, Elena," she told me later. "This is what we've been working toward." The way she said, "we" felt heavy, like the rest of us had been the weight holding her down. If you've ever watched your sibling become the main character in your family's story while you played the supporting role in the shadows, you know how complicated that love can feel. Type golden child if you grew up in a house like that. I was assigned my usual part: show up, smile, don't draw attention. My mother sent me detailed messages about the dress code, black tie, very refined, and gently suggested that my uniform might feel out of place among Sophia's family. Miguel even texted me once, casually, "Hey sis, just keep things low-key for the wedding, yeah? Sophia's family is pretty traditional." I replied with short, agreeable answers like I always did. Of course, I understand, but each message chipped away at something deep inside me. The Whitmore family lived on a beautiful estate just outside the city. Sprawling lawns, old oak trees, and a historic ballroom that had hosted generations of their events. Sophia herself was warm and kind when we spoke on the phone. She actually asked real questions about my life in the army. For a moment, it felt refreshing. But even that small kindness made the contrast with my own family sharper. As the wedding weekend approached, the pressure built. My mother called almost daily with new suggestions. The lavender dress appeared in my childhood room. Family lunches turned into subtle interrogations about whether I was still doing that military thing, or thinking about a real career someday. My Aunt Carol sighed dramatically when I said I wasn't seeing anyone. "That life can't go on forever, dear." Through it all, my father stayed quiet. He nodded along, never pushing back. Miguel laughed nervously and changed the subject. And I sat there, smiling, passing the bread, slowly disappearing right in front of them. One afternoon, while helping my mother arrange centerpieces, she looked at me with that familiar mix of love and worry. "Elena, I just want this day to be perfect for your brother. You understand, right? The Whitmores are very elegant people. A uniform might make things awkward." "I understand, Mom." But inside, I was already counting the cost of all these years of understanding. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I stood in my old bedroom again, looking at the lavender dress hanging next to my dress blues. Two paths, one comfortable and familiar, one terrifying because it meant finally being seen. I thought about Marcus's coin in my pocket. I thought about every soldier I had led, every name I carried, every morning I chose to show up as Captain Reyes even when it was hard. And I realized something important. My family had spent years asking me to hide the best parts of myself. Not because they hated me, but because my truth challenged the story they wanted to tell about who we were. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with a quiet, steady resolve. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply stopped agreeing to disappear. The wedding itself was beautiful. Soft lights, string quartet, Sophia looking radiant as she walked down the aisle. I sat in the back row in civilian clothes, watching my little brother, the boy I once taught to ride a bike, marry the woman he loved. I cried real, quiet tears during their vows. Because no matter how much they had hurt me, I still loved him. Family is complicated that way. But as the ceremony ended and guests began moving toward the grand ballroom for the reception, I knew the real moment was coming. I slipped away to a side room where my garment bag waited. It was time to stop performing. The real turning point came from the most unexpected person, my Aunt Carla, my mother's younger sister. She had always been the quiet observer in our family, the one who saw things but rarely spoke up. During the rehearsal dinner, she kept glancing at me across the table with this troubled look, like she was carrying something heavy she didn't know how to set down. Later that evening, while I was back in my childhood bedroom trying to steady my thoughts, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Aunt Carla. No words, just a screenshot. I opened it, and the floor seemed to shift beneath me. It was a group chat titled, "Wedding Logistics." Everyone was in it. My mother, my father, Miguel, Aunt Carol, the cousins. Everyone except me. The messages were from that same morning. My mother had written, "Please make sure no one encourages Elena to wear her uniform. The Whitmores are extremely refined. It would be humiliating for Miguel. The military is embarrassing and I won't have her turning this wedding into a spectacle. Seat her at table 12, near the back." There were reactions underneath. Thumbs up. A cousin replied, "Lol, agreed." Miguel simply wrote, "Fine." My father had read it but said nothing. I read the messages once, then again, then a third time, slower, letting every word sink in. If you've ever discovered that your own family was planning how to erase you behind your back, you know that strange, cold calm that settles over you. It's not rage, it's clarity. Drop group chat in the comments if you've ever been blindsided like this. I didn't cry, I didn't throw my phone. I just sat on the edge of my bed in complete silence, the lavender dress still folded neatly on the chair beside me. For the first time, I saw my place in this family with brutal honesty. I wasn't the difficult daughter. I wasn't even the rebellious one. I was the inconvenience they had quietly agreed to manage. My mother's fear had always been there, but seeing it written out so plainly. The military is embarrassing. Hit differently. These weren't offhand comments anymore. This was coordinated. This was deliberate. And every person I had protected and supported over the years had gone along with it. I thought about all the times I had chosen silence to keep the peace, all the deployments I never fully explained, all the medals I never showed them, all the nights I carried the weight of names like Marcus Hale alone, because I knew they didn't want to hear it. That coin was still in my pocket. I took it out and held it tight, feeling its familiar weight. Marcus gave his life. I came home. And here I was, still being asked to hide the very thing that gave my survival meaning. The strangest part, I wasn't devastated, I was done. In that moment, something shifted permanently inside me. I realized I had spent 15 years trying to earn a place at a table that had already decided I didn't belong unless I shrank myself. More. I didn't reply to Aunt Carla. I didn't confront anyone that night. Instead, I did what I do best. I made a quiet, deliberate plan. Not to ruin my brother's wedding. That was never the goal. But to finally stop participating in my own erasure. I looked at the lavender dress one last time, then hung it deeper in the closet. I laid out my dress blues on the bed, running my fingers over every ribbon and medal, especially the silver star. Each one had a story. Each one had cost something real. This uniform had never been about pride or ego. It was about the soldiers I led, the promises I kept, and the ones who didn't make it back. It was the truest version of me. And for the first time in my life, I decided I would wear it without apology. The next morning, I went through the motions of the wedding day with a strange sense of peace. I attended the ceremony in simple civilian clothes, sitting quietly in the back, watching Miguel and Sofia exchange vows. I felt genuine happiness for them. Love is complicated, but it was still there. But as the guests moved toward the grand ballroom for the reception, I knew the moment had arrived. I slipped into a private side room where my garment bag was waiting. I closed the door, took a slow breath, and began to change. This wasn't about revenge. This was about finally showing up as Captain Elena Reyes. After reading that group chat, I didn't storm downstairs or cause a scene. I simply sat there in the quiet of my childhood bedroom and let the truth settle over me like a heavy blanket. For the first time in 15 years, I stopped trying to convince myself that my family just didn't understand. They understood perfectly. They had simply decided that who I was didn't fit their picture, and they had been managing me accordingly. That realization brought a strange kind of peace. If you've ever reached the moment where you finally stop negotiating with people who keep asking you to disappear, you know how freeing it feels, even when it hurts. Type peace in the comments if you've ever found clarity in the middle of pain. I wasn't going to ruin my brother's wedding. That was never my intention. Miguel deserved his day with Sofia, but I also deserved to stop helping my family hide me. No more shrinking. No more pretending. No more lavender dress. I made my decision right there, sitting on that old bed with Marcus's coin still warm in my palm. I would wear my dress blues to the reception. Not as a weapon. Not as a statement meant to embarrass anyone, but as the simple, honest truth of who I had become. I spent the next hour preparing in silence. I laid the uniform out carefully, checking every detail the way I would before an important formation. The dark coat, the crisp white gloves, the medals in their exact order, especially the silver star that represented the hardest day of my life. I ran my fingers across the ribbons and remembered the weight they carried. Not for show, for the lives they represented. This wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. It was about no longer betraying myself. My mother had spent her life running from the pain her father brought home from Vietnam. I understood that fear, but I had spent my life trying to prove that my choice wasn't a repeat of that pain. I had led with honor. I had brought soldiers home when I could. I had carried the ones I couldn't in my heart every single day. That deserved to be seen, even if only by me. I thought about texting Aunt Carla back, but I didn't. Some truths need to unfold in their own time. Instead, I whispered to the empty room, "I'm done hiding." The next morning passed in a gentle fog. I attended the ceremony in simple clothes, sitting quietly in the back pew. Watching Miguel and Sofia exchange vows, I felt real tears on my cheeks. My little brother looked so happy, so sure. For a few beautiful minutes, none of the family tension mattered. I was just a big sister watching her baby brother start his new life. I still loved him deeply, even after everything. But as the ceremony ended and the guests began walking across the manicured lawn toward the grand ballroom, my heart beat a little steadier. I knew what came next. I excused myself early and slipped into a small side room near the reception hall where my garment bag hung waiting. The space was quiet, lit by soft afternoon light coming through a tall window. I closed the door, took a slow breath, and began to change. Piece by piece, I put on the uniform that had shaped me. The trousers, the shirt, the tie, the coat. Each button felt like a small act of courage. Last, I pinned the silver star and reached into the inner pocket to place Marcus's coin right over my heart, where it always belonged. I stood in front of the small mirror and looked at myself. Really looked. Not as the daughter they wanted me to be, not as the phase my mother still hoped would pass, but as Captain Elena Reyes. A woman who had led soldiers through fire. A woman who carried names no one in my family had ever asked about. A woman who was finally done asking for permission to exist. I wasn't nervous, I was ready. I wasn't walking in to fight. I was walking in to stop running. As I reached for the door handle, I heard my mother's voice in my mind one last time. "Just blend in." I smiled softly to myself and whispered, "Not today." Then I stepped out of that side room and into the light of the ballroom, where 200 guests were already mingling, laughing, and raising glasses. The moment had arrived. The morning of the wedding arrived with soft southern sunlight filtering through the oak trees surrounding the Whitmore estate. I dressed in simple civilian clothes, a modest navy dress that wouldn't draw attention, and made my way to the ceremony site. I chose a seat in the very back row, partly out of habit, partly because I still wanted this day to belong fully to Miguel and Sofia. As the string quartet began playing, and guests filled the white chairs arranged on the lawn, I sat quietly observing everything. My mother was in her element, moving between groups with bright smiles and careful hugs. My father stood beside her, nodding politely. Miguel looked nervous but happy in his tuxedo, and when Sofia appeared at the end of the aisle in her elegant gown, the whole crowd let out a collective sigh of admiration. I watched my little brother stand there, tall and sure, exchanging vows with the woman he loved. Tears slipped down my cheeks as they promised to cherish each other. In that moment, none of the group chat messages or the lavender dress mattered. He was still the boy I taught to ride a bike, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I loved him. Deeply, even after everything. If you've ever sat through a funeral while carrying heavy unspoken pain, you know how complicated those tears can feel. Happy for them, grieving for yourself at the same time. Type complicated love if you understand. During the ceremony, my mind wandered back to my own journey. I thought about the deployments where I had to stay strong for my soldiers, while wondering if my family would even notice if something happened to me. I thought about Marcus again, how he would have laughed at all this fancy setup, and then quietly asked if I was okay. That coin in my pocket felt heavier than usual. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the crowd cheered, I clapped along with everyone else. For a brief window, I allowed myself to feel only joy for my brother. No resentment. Just love. That peace didn't last long. When the ceremony ended, guests began drifting across the manicured lawn toward the grand ballroom for the reception. The air was filled with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the soft rustle of expensive fabrics. My mother glanced in my direction once, her eyes scanning my outfit with visible relief. She thought I had chosen the safe path. I slipped away from the crowd and made my way to the small side room I had scouted earlier. My garment bag hung neatly on the back of the door. I stepped inside, closed the door gently behind me, and stood there for a long moment in silence. This was my last hesitation. Part of me, the old part that had spent 15 years keeping the peace, whispered that it still wasn't too late. I could stay in the navy dress, sit at table 12 near the back, smile politely, and fly home tomorrow without rocking the boat. No one would be hurt. The family would stay comfortable. I could continue their shame quietly, like I always had. I stared at the garment bag for what felt like forever. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the zipper. The sound of it opening echoed in the small room like a decision being made. I thought about every time I had chosen silence, every time I had dimmed myself so they could shine brighter. Every time I had swallowed my stories about the soldiers I served with, the nights I couldn't sleep, the weight I carried alone. Then I thought about Marcus, about the promise I made to live fully, because he couldn't. About the silver star on my chest that represented not just my actions, but the lives of the men and women who trusted me to bring them home. I whispered to the empty room, no more hiding. Piece by piece, I changed into my dress blues. The fabric felt familiar and grounding, like slipping back into my own skin after years of wearing someone else's. I adjusted the medals carefully, especially the silver star. I placed Marcus's coin over my heart. When I finally looked in the small mirror, I didn't see an embarrassment. I saw Captain Elena Reyes, steady, honest, and finally at peace with herself. My mother's voice echoed in my head one last time. Just blend in. I smiled softly and answered her in my mind. I've blended in long enough. I took one deep breath, straightened my coat, and reached for the door handle. The sounds of the reception, music, laughter, celebration, filtered through from the ballroom. It was time. I stepped out of that small side room and into the hallway leading to the grand ballroom. My dress blues felt perfect, crisp, familiar, and completely me. The sound of my polished shoes on the marble floor was steady, just like I had been trained. No turning back now. The ballroom was breathtaking. Tall ceilings with crystal chandeliers catching the golden late afternoon light, round tables, dressed in white linen, and fresh flowers, and nearly 200 guests mingling with drinks in hand. The string quartet played softly in the corner. Laughter and conversation filled the air. It was exactly the elegant scene my mother had dreamed of. I started walking slowly along the back wall, heading toward table 12, the one they had assigned me, far from the head table. I wasn't trying to make a spectacle. I just wanted to take my seat as myself for once. But the room noticed. If you've ever walked into a space knowing you were about to be truly seen for the first time, you know that electric shift in the air. Type "seen" in the comments if you've had that moment. At first it was subtle. A woman near me paused mid-sentence. A man touched his wife's arm and nodded in my direction. The volume of conversation dipped just slightly, like the whole room was trying to figure out what it was looking at. Heads turned slowly. Eyes landed on the medals, especially the silver star on my chest. I kept my pace even, eyes forward, shoulders back. Old habits from years of formation. Then, I saw my mother. She was near the center of the room, laughing with a group of Whitmore guests, when her eyes found me. Her face went from smiling to pale in a heartbeat. Her hand flew to her throat. She looked like she had seen a ghost. My father turned to see what had frozen her, and his expression crumbled. Miguel, standing near the head table with Sophia, rose halfway from his chair, mouth slightly open. For a few long seconds, the entire ballroom hung in tense silence. I continued walking toward my assigned table, still hugging the wall. Old instincts told me to make myself small, to slip into my seat quietly, but I didn't. I simply walked with quiet dignity. That's when the first veteran stood up. An older man with silver hair and perfect posture near the front slowly pushed back his chair. Then another veteran 2 tables over, then more. One by one, scattered throughout the room, like they had been quietly waiting, they rose to their feet. 15 veterans in total. Some in tuxedos, some in suits, but every single one of them stood at attention. A few rendered crisp salutes. The quartet faltered and went quiet. The silence became complete. My mother looked like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. This was her worst nightmare. Not just me in uniform, but the entire room shifting focus in a way she couldn't control. I stopped walking and stood still, taking it all in. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. This wasn't the plan. I had only wanted to stop hiding. I never expected this. One of the veterans, a retired colonel with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. Later, I learned he was Sophia's great-uncle. Spoke in a clear, carrying voice that filled the entire ballroom. Silver star in the room. Those 4 words landed like thunder. The colonel began walking toward me through the stunned crowd. His steps were deliberate. When he reached me, he looked directly at the silver star on my chest, then met my eyes with deep respect. "Captain Reyes," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "on behalf of the Whitmore family and every veteran in this room, we are honored to have you here." He extended his hand. I took it firmly. In that moment, standing in the middle of my brother's wedding reception, surrounded by 15 veterans who had risen for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt seen. Completely, undeniably seen. And my family, the people who had begged me to hide, were forced to watch it all unfold in front of the very crowd they had tried so hard to impress. The colonel's words, "Silver star in the room," seemed to echo off the high ceilings of the ballroom. Time felt like it slowed down. I stood there in my dress blues, heart steady but loud in my ears as 15 veterans remained on their feet. Some saluted. Others simply stood tall with that unmistakable military bearing. Shoulders squared, chins level, eyes full of quiet recognition. The entire room of 200 guests had gone completely silent. If you've ever experienced a moment where strangers honored you in a way your own family never did, you know how overwhelming it feels. Type "honored" in the comments if this part hits you hard. The retired colonel, Sophia's great-uncle, didn't rush. He held my gaze with deep respect and spoke again, his voice calm and carrying. "Captain Elena Reyes earned the Silver Star for extraordinary courage under fire. She dragged wounded soldiers to safety while returning fire." One of soldiers was Sergeant Marcus Hale. She brought his body home so his mother could say goodbye properly. That is the kind of leader this uniform represents. He turned slightly toward the guests. "The Whitmore family has served this nation for 4 generations. We know exactly what that medal costs. We are proud to have Captain Reyes with us today." Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back the way I had been trained. I returned the colonel's salute cleanly, then lowered my hand. For the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of my service being witnessed. Not hidden, not minimized, but truly seen. My mother stood frozen near the center of the room. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time, in front of the exact people she had tried so desperately to impress. Her face had gone pale, then flushed red. My father looked smaller than I had ever seen him, staring at the floor. Miguel remained half standing at the head table, his hand over his mouth, eyes wide with shock. The silence broke softly as more guests began to understand. Whispers spread. A few civilians stood up too, following the veteran's lead. The respect in the room was palpable. I hadn't planned any of this. I had only wanted to stop hiding. But the universe, or maybe just simple truth, had other plans. I took a slow breath and spoke for the first time since entering the ballroom. My voice was quiet but clear, steady like I was giving a briefing to my troops. I didn't come here to make a scene or ruin my brother's day. I came here as myself. This uniform isn't for show. It carries the names of people who didn't get to come home. People like Sergeant Marcus Hale. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the challenge coin. I held it up, so the light caught its worn edges. Marcus gave me this the night before our convoy was hit. He was 23. He told me to carry it for luck. I carry him every single day. This silver star isn't just mine. It belongs to every soldier who trusted me to lead them. The room remained hushed. Even the veterans listened with deep attention. My mother tried to recover. She moved forward through the crowd with a forced smile, her voice too high and too bright. "We're so proud of her. We've always been so proud of our Elena." But the words rang hollow. The room had already seen the truth. They had watched her beg me to hide. They had seen the veteran stand when my own family had tried to seat me at the back. I looked directly at her for a moment, calm and without anger. "Mom," I said softly, "I'm not the one who should be embarrassed." Then, I turned back to the colonel and the 15 veterans still standing. "Thank you," I told them. "You have no idea what this means." The colonel nodded once firmly. "We know, Captain, we know." In that ballroom, surrounded by respect I had never received from my own blood, something inside me finally healed. Not completely, but enough. The veterans slowly returned to their seats. The quartet began playing again gently. The reception tried to continue, but nothing would ever be the same. My family had spent years asking me to disappear. That day, the world stood up and refused to let them. The applause from the veterans faded into soft conversation as the reception tried to find its rhythm again. But the energy in the room had completely shifted. What was supposed to be a celebration of Miguel and Sophia now carried the weight of a truth my family had spent years avoiding. My mother recovered first, or at least tried to. She moved through the crowd toward me with both hands outstretched, painting a wide smile across her face. "We are so proud of our daughter," she announced loudly to anyone within earshot. "We've always been so proud of Elena and her service." Her voice was too bright, too forced. It cracked at the edges. The guests who had just witnessed everything offered polite smiles, but many eyes lingered on her with quiet judgment. The room had seen the truth. The group chat, the back table, the lavender dress, the years of quiet erasure. If you've ever watched someone try to rewrite history in real time after being exposed, you know how uncomfortable that moment feels. Type exposed if you've witnessed something like this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her and said calmly, "Mom, let's not do this right now. This is Miguel's day." She reached for my arm anyway, gripping it a little too tightly. In a lower voice meant only for me, she whispered, "Why did you do this? After everything I asked, you've embarrassed the whole family." I met her eyes steadily. I didn't embarrass anyone. I just stopped hiding. There's a difference. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother truly speechless. The fear she had carried since her own childhood was now on full display in front of the refined people she had tried so hard to impress. Later in the evening, Miguel found me near the garden doors, away from the music and lights. His eyes were red. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a long dream. "Elena, I never knew," he said, his voice breaking. "I never asked, not once, about any of it. The deployments, the medals, what you went through. I just went along with everything Mom said. I'm so sorry." I put my hand on his shoulder the way I used to when he was small. "You were living your life, Miguel, and I was living mine. But thank you for saying it now." He hugged me tightly, Longer than he had in years. You looked incredible in that uniform, he whispered. You always have. My father approached me even later, near the end of the night when most guests had moved to the dance floor. He held an old, creased envelope in his hands. His shoulders were slumped. He looked older than he had that morning. I kept this, he said quietly, handing it to me. It was the official citation letter for my Silver Star, the one the Army had sent years ago. I read it many times, but I never showed it to anyone. I let your mother decide how we talked about you. I chose silence because it was easier. I failed you, Elena, and I'm ashamed. I took the envelope, feeling the worn paper between my fingers. For a moment I didn't speak. Then I said gently but honestly, "It's not okay, Dad, but I appreciate you saying it now. That matters." He nodded, eyes wet. We stood there in silence, not comfortable silence, but real silence, the kind that holds truth instead of avoidance. My mother tried one final time near the coat check as the night wound down. Her makeup was still perfect, but her eyes looked tired. "We should put this behind us," she said. "It's done. Let's not let one night ruin the family." I looked at her for a long moment. "Mom, I'm not putting anything behind us. I'm not hiding anymore. If you want me in your life, you'll have me as captain. Elena Reyes, with the uniform, the stories, and the truth. I won't sit at the back table again. That's my boundary." She didn't answer. She simply nodded once and walked away. I stood there watching her go, feeling the weight of 15 years slowly lifting off my shoulders. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't attacked. I had simply refused to disappear anymore. And that was enough. The rest of the night passed in a gentle haze. The music continued, people danced, and Miguel and Sofia celebrated their new beginning. But underneath the celebration, something profound had shifted. Not just for me, but for everyone who witnessed what happened in that ballroom. I didn't stay much longer after my conversation with my mother. I said my goodbyes to Sofia and the Colonel, thanked the veterans again, and quietly slipped out. As I drove back to my hotel that night, the weight I had carried for 15 years felt noticeably lighter. Not gone completely, healing doesn't work that fast, but lighter. If you've ever taken the brave step to stop hiding who you are, even when it cost you comfort, you know that quiet peace that follows. Type light error in the comments if you felt that shift in your own life. 2 days later, I flew home to Fort Liberty. My duffel bag sat in the overhead compartment like always, but I carried something new with me, the worn envelope. From my father, and the memory of 15 veterans standing up when my own family had asked me to sit down. In the weeks that followed, small changes began. Miguel started calling more often, asking real questions about my life. Sofia became a genuine friend, texting me just to check in. Even a few cousins reached out, suddenly curious about the military thing they had once dismissed. My father sent me a long message one evening, acknowledging his silence over the years. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. My mother, she struggled more. Some wounds run too deep to heal quickly. She still sends polite texts, but the old easy warmth is gone. She's learning, slowly, that love sometimes requires seeing the parts you once tried to hide. I've accepted that. I no longer wait for their full approval. I give it to myself now. Looking back, the greatest lesson from that weekend wasn't the dramatic moment in the ballroom. It was the quiet decision I made in my childhood bedroom, to stop participating in my own erasure. I didn't need to yell or fight. I simply needed to stop shrinking. If you've ever been asked to hide your strength, your story, or your truth to keep someone else comfortable, whether it's family, friends, or a relationship, hear this: you don't have to disappear anymore. The right people will stand up when they see the real you. And those who don't, they were never your safe place to begin with. I still carry Marcus's coin every single day. I still wear the uniform with pride. But now I do it without apology, even when I walk into rooms full of people who might not understand. To every person watching this who has felt invisible in their own family, you are not alone. Your story matters. Your courage matters. Stop waiting for permission to be who you are. Type stand in the comments if this story gave you strength. Share it with someone who needs to hear they don't have to shrink anymore. And if you are ready to stop hiding, drop a heart. I see you. Thank you for sitting with me through all of this. I'm Captain Elena Reyes. I'm still serving. I'm still healing. And I'm finally quietly free.